Hi, everybody. It's Mary Rowe from the Canadian Urban Institute. Thanks for joining us. And I'm just here looking at texts from all my colleagues and friends in Louisiana as they cope with Hurricane Francine. I cut my teeth on a lot of my sort of growing awareness about what the role of natural assets has to be in protecting communities and how much of an issue this is. And so I'm so pleased that we're hosting this. As I started to say, I cut my teeth being involved in the recovery after Hurricane Katrina and the levee failures in the Gulf Coast almost 20 years ago. So I am very appreciative of this topic and appreciative of all our colleagues who were, leaning into this topic as critical as it is. So I appreciate too that I was just making a bit of a joke that CityTalk is being taken over by the West Coast today. Because all of our panelists, including Jonathan, who's actually a newcomer to Toronto, they're all West Coasters. So as always, I'm sure all the West Coasters who are just having their first cup of coffee are going to say, it's about time we realized we got to look west and learn about what's really important. So I appreciate that. There's a whole thing about how we did in any of the east of anything. We're always a bit slower in the east, just saying. And so that works at almost all scales. And somebody said to me the other day, it's because of the way the earth rotates. But who knows? But there is a thing about if you look in cities, it's often the east side that has more of a challenge. And here we are in a country where the west side is leading. So thank you, West Siders, for coming on and joining us first thing in the morning. And thank you for this topic and how topical it is. As I said, I happen to be in Toronto today, but I'm often in other places. And the CUI works across the country with partners. As you all know, and we have staff across the country. But this is the traditional territory of a number of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. And we're going to hear more and more today about the relevance of Indigenous practice and Indigenous solutions finding and the extent to which we continue to be confronted by the ways in which settler assumptions and settler processes subverted what was actually the right thing to do in the first place. And here we are going back and trying to actually undo and redo and live in a much more harmonious and collaborative way with nature. So as I say, I'm very appreciative of that. CUI is the traditional territory covered by the Treaty 13, the Williams Treaty, but many parts, Toronto is, but many parts of the country are unceded, no treaties. And what does that actually mean as we actually journey forth together? So let's have that always as an undercurrent of the conversations we have here on CityTalk. I encourage people to come into the chat and put questions up there and clarifications. And those of you that have been coming to CityTalks, we're almost at, I think, 250 of them now. And some of you come to every one of them, and some of you dip in and out, which is fabulous. And some of you watch them after the fact when we post them. But the chat is a really active learning channel. So if you haven't ever signed in on the chat, sign in on the chat and you'll learn stuff. And lots of conversation takes place there. As I say, lots of resources. We publish the chat, we publish the recording, and we always say that the conversation is never over. It's just the beginning. So if I could ask my fellow panelists to come on and expose their screens, and we'll do the best we can with a little bit of shaky technology as we try to cover the country on this. But I want to just first off congratulate my colleague Roy, who commissioned with us at CUI to do this report. And as I say, so timely as we every day open up another story about some significant weather event and how the extent to which we have or haven't been able to adjust to that. And what are we doing to actually literally shore ourselves up as the climate changes and as severe weather affects us in all these different ways. So can you just describe for us a little bit why the report was necessary? And also, when everybody, could you introduce yourself when I ask you to, and just tell us a little bit about where you're coming in from, but also what your work is, who you work with, and what your focus is. And then we'll have a group conversation. And as I say, everybody can chime in and throw some ideas into the chat, and we'll have a good sharp hour together. So Roy, I'm going to start with you. Just give us the top line about why you did this. And I appreciate people are checking in on the chat and telling us where they're coming in from too. Go ahead, Roy, over to you. Welcome to CityTalk.
Thanks very much, Mary. My name is Roy Brook. I'm the executive director of a not-for-profit called the Natural Assets Initiative. And just regarding this report, the both and integrating natural assets into federal housing supply, I just want to be very clear that the real credit here is due to Carolyn Weitzman, who's the lead author and an associate of the Canadian Urban institute and one of the country's leading experts in the field. So
I thought you were going to call her a national treasure. Did you? She's on the call. Carolyn, we're going to call you a national treasure. Just saying. But I
I thought that was her official title.
Yeah, that's right. I think we'll get it on a business card for her. But the thing is about Carolyn, which is why she was a great person to work with you on this, is to try to actually forge a conversation that it's never only one thing. And I think that's the point that you're making in this report, Roy, is that we have to look at a holistic ecosystem approach to every challenge we've got. Carolyn is a housing specialist, but she also understands environment and she understands economy. And so hats off to Carolyn Weitzman. I'll go back to you, Roy, to continue to summarize for us the report.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could synthesize this into a few big ideas. Does the country need houses and affordable houses? Yes, of course it does. But those houses, our housing stock, is only livable, it's only affordable if it has a constant stream of services like flood risk reduction and stormwater management.
Yeah.
And what we know is that natural assets provide cost-effective and reliable services. So I would say that one of the basic messages in this report is that we have to figure out how to walk and chew gum at the same time. Yes, we have to build homes, we have to build affordable homes, but we also, in the process, can't destroy the very natural assets that make those homes livable, resilient, cost-effective in a changing climate. So I think that's point one. Point two is the feds are making a big re-entry into the housing supply market, if I can call it that, in Canada. And so that provides us with an historic opportunity for them to really weave nature, integrate nature and its preservation into the building of Canada's homes. And so the report really finally concludes that in the big areas where the feds are playing, there's very practical, very specific things that they can do to ensure that as we build homes, we're also protecting the natural assets that will keep those homes livable. So one of the big ones is ensuring that in any funding agreements that they are signing with the provinces, they are prioritizing the preservation of natural assets. So not merely defaulting to gray or engineered assets, which may in the end be dead-end assets in a changing climate, but instead seeing where, when, where, and how natural assets can provide critical services, drinking water filtration, stormwater management, flood risk reduction. They're also cutting loose a wide range of federal lands on which homes can be built. And there too, I think there's 1950s ways to build, and or there's ways to build that incorporate what we've learned about the importance of natural assets. The report obviously urges the latter, and it gives a bunch of really interesting examples from around the world about how this isn't sort of merely do-gooding. This leads to cost savings and really practical results. So in summary, we're basically saying, as we build houses, let's protect nature, because that's what we need if those houses are to be affordable and livable over their lifespan.
Yeah, I mean, this is like it's kind of like a call to arms. I just want to thank you for those of you that are responding to my plea that you go into the chat. All of you that have gone in and checked yourselves in and then only send it to host and panelists, go back and send it to everyone. Sherry Hanley, you came only into host and panelists, not just singling you out. There are lots of you, Nadia, others. So go back on your chat function and toggle it to everyone so that everyone sees it. And the hosts and panelists are happy to see you here, but I'd like everyone to know. Back, Roy, to the sort of the bigger picture here about how have we managed to not pay attention to nature? I worry a little bit that we're going to overcorrect and all of a sudden it's housing, and then we tend to go to the lowest common denominator and suddenly we're just doing stuff. Do you have that anxiety too? Do you lie in bed awake worried about this?
Well, I mean, I'm a good sleeper, so I can't say I lie awake at night per se. But look, we saw this in the Greenbelt. We saw this
Yeah.
we saw this kind of artificial debate where I think the argument was put out that either you can have houses or you can have nature, but you can't have both. And
Right.
it's just not true. It's just not accurate. Homes require the services from nature. However, as a society, and historically, our actions sort of tend to say otherwise. When we look at nature, we tend to, we as a society, we as local governments tend to look at it narrowly as providing only green or recreational or social amenities. But the reality is that, say, a wetland, in addition to maybe providing recreational or social amenities, by virtue of storing water, it can also aid in drinking water filtration, stormwater management, flood risk reduction, aquifer recharge, and we have a growing body of tools that allow us to bring that recognition into decision making. We now have well over 150 local governments that are starting to take action in a space that is now known as natural asset management.
Yeah,
Basically,
it's a whole domain. You've pretty much created a domain. But when I was reflecting, 20 years ago when we were dealing with it on the Gulf Coast, it really wasn't a domain then. We had to kind of convince people, oh, there need to be multiple lines of defense. People didn't even really know what a wetland was. So in 20 years, we have made some progress. You've codified it, and you created this notion that this is an asset that we can deploy in a sensible way.
Yes, but we need to move quickly because we're at the same time, we're building houses fast, we're losing wetlands
Yeah.
fast, the federal money is getting blown out the door. And if we miss that opportunity, there'll be billions of dollars spent in what will tend to be what I could loosely call old school ways, which tend to ignore the role that nature can play.
Right. I hear you. We also worked with the Infrastructure Bank earlier this summer on a report on what the actual infrastructure cost needs to be to accompany a new housing unit. It's about $100,000. So you can't just throw the housing unit up. You've got to recognize, as you suggest, all the other pieces that allow that house to become our home, to become functional. And then now you're saying, and let's not forget that we have all these other assets. Let me go to some of our colleagues across the country. Patience, I'm going to come to you next. To give us your particular perspective. And again, you heard me do the call out around Indigenous practice, and that is your world. And I'm sure you've had years and years of frustration trying to get people to pay attention. But it feels to me now, I mean, maybe you tell me, do you feel we're turning a bit of a corner? And what is the particular perspective that you're bringing to the work that you're doing?
Well, first of all, I need to introduce myself. My name is Patience Cox. I'm a Jameson from the Upper Similkameen Indian Band, which is in southern BC, for those south central BC, for those of you not familiar. In terms of my background, I also want to be really clear that I am not speaking on behalf of all Indigenous people in Canada or even any Indigenous people in Canada. I speak for myself only and my own experience. And so I just want to be really clear. There's a lot of people in Canada and across the country that have a lot of experience in working in this field. And I absolutely wouldn't suggest that that is me. I think from my point of view, the work that I've been doing is really about as the shifting, NAI has started shifting and working with Indigenous communities that are and the whole territory. So it's shifting the thinking from a straight urban, which is really important. There's a real need there. There's absolutely, I'm not questioning that for 1 second. But as we move out of the urban, there's a need to be looking at the whole of watersheds, the whole of territory in a holistic way. And as you are building, as you are developing, how can you do that in a way that is in cooperation with the land? And that's the kind of work that I am working with Roy on.
Yeah, and it's a dilemma because, I mean, there's a gazillion dilemmas, but part of it is also because municipal boundaries fairly arbitrary, right? And water doesn't stop at the end of one municipality, right? That's part of it.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that. I mean, how do we, I guess it's just puts the onus on proponents, people trying to put forward projects, that they've got to work with multiple jurisdictions. That's all there is to it.
Yeah. And you have to start, I believe that you have to start thinking of things in terms of, yes, the holistic. So it
Mhm.
isn't just about water. It's, the land itself, the plants that we get very worried when we're mitigating risk about the built environment. And
Mhm.
sometimes we forget about the actual environment, the non-built environment, the natural environment also has some risks.
Mhm.
And part of the responsibility of us as human beings is to look at it from that point of view.
Mhm.
What is how are the animals going to survive? How are our food sources going to survive? All of those kinds of things also need to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, and Roy, I'm going to come back to you in a sec. I'm going to go to the others and get them in, but one of the questions I've got that patients raises for me is, how do we price these things? This is the dilemma, is that, as you suggest, patients, they look and they say, well, on our balance sheet, we have to protect these assets because they have a monetary value. But you're saying, but yes, but there are all these other assets, and how do we move the financing of that?
How do
how do we
how do we value
how do we
how do
value
we
that?
value food? How do we value natural food?
Yeah.
How do we value the green space that I talk about reciprocity a lot.
Mhm.
And it's that idea that, yes, what do we take from the land, but what do we give back?
Mhm.
And Robin Kim, I just want to say that Robin's work in braided sweetgrass, the principle of you never take the first that you see, because
Right.
then you'll never take the last.
Right.
And so part of the conversation needs to be, how do we as humans take responsibility in a way that is actually looking after the land, and because the land is giving to us. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'll let you go to Roy. Sorry.
Patients, that's fine. Can one of my colleagues put braided sweetgrass and Robin's book into the chat so people can refer to it? Because it makes this point perfectly, as you're suggesting. And the dilemma is, do we have the right tools, decision-making tools, that allow these kinds of assets to appear on a balance sheet? I'm going to ask Jonathan that in a second. Jonathan, giving you fair warning, that's going to come to you. But before we go, Kim, talk to us. I think you're in Nanaimo, right? Are you in?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm on the traditional territories of the Snuneymuxw, the Snuneymuxw, and the Qualicum First Nations. So
Mhm.
good morning.
Good morning. And talk to us about your particular perspective on this topic and the way in which you're trying to, move the needle, whatever needle you're trying to move.
Yeah, I think one of the key things as a professional planner is that we must honor the land. Conventional crap development, I'm much more direct than Roy, that I wrote in my book on Dockside Green. Conventional crap development, first it comes out and denudes the land of anything, of its value. Where were the trees? Where were the waterways? Where were the wetlands? And then builds conventional crap toxic boxes. And in my book on Dockside Green, I actually say it's like Dorothy the Wizard of Oz. If she were to appear on this denuded landscape, she'd click her heels and want to go back home.
Yeah.
So we need to, when we start doing development, you save money. If all you care about is economics, you should be valuing natural assets. Because if this report that's just come out is one of many that says it values these natural assets. So where was the waterway? You don't need to import topsoil after you've denuded it, and then the sod. Don't build sod anymore. And trees and all the stuff they have to bring in. Why don't you leave it? And start honoring the landscape and the vegetation and the topography to be able to do that. So in the regional district of Nanaimo, we've done with natural assets and green analytics, 208,000 hectares of our regional district has now a natural asset inventory, a condition and risk assessment. And we've used that to develop development permit areas to protect their environmental protection development permit areas in the land use regulations to protect aquifers and trees and wetlands and those valuable functions that natural assets provide. And so I think, though, the development industry, the development process needs to start valuing natural assets because of it saves money, right? As I said, it saves money, it values the land, it provides that economic balance. We've seen in COVID this exodus from cities. Yes, it may be cheaper to go buy a house out there in the suburbs or further away, but it's because of the intrinsic need that we have to be attached to or connected to nature. And I think that is forgotten in a lot of urban development, and a need to be able to do that. And you need to incentivize the outcome you want. We used a total bottom line development process to sell the dockside greenlands, and the developer said, for the first time, you rewarded the right thing. You rewarded us for doing the right thing instead of penalizing us. I've also done a total bottom line development tool for all developments that we did in the city of Port Coquitlam. That's like almost 2 decades ago, those projects. So how do you change the process by using those tools that value those things, that incentivize, and through the regulatory process, if you do the right thing, you get fast-tracked automatically. If you give a piece of crap, the conventional crap development, you get stuck in the process. We have to turning the conventional process around, and also valuing fees and charges to do the outcome you want, because currently it incentivizes sprawl, low density and sprawl, and it needs to be changed around to financial incentives. Those things need to be changed, and can fairly easily. There are already models out there to change them around to incentivize protection of natural assets, protection and the green infrastructure.
I hope we're gonna subtitle this session "The End of Crap Development." You heard it here first. You know, I think you just packed a whole lot of things into what you just said there, Kim, because it's an intervention. I always say that part of what we have to do is show people what's possible, and a lot of the work that you just cited is showing other jurisdictions what's possible. You know, do you know that expression? If we can't actually, what is it? If it works in theory, it'll work in practice, or the other way around. If it works in practice, it could actually work in theory. So just to show tangible examples, we're seeing this in the housing field generally, that there are communities taking some risks, trying to come up with quick solutions that are effective and not doing any damage. And then we can, you know, then other folks can watch and copy. And I think that's part of what your book, I hope, and I see they put it into the chat, thanks gang, so people can have a look at some of these case studies to see it is possible. I want to come back after we get Jonathan in. I do want to come back on how do we overcome these obstacles? Because, you know, you can find a one-off, you can find a couple of communities that will do it, but part of, I think, what Roy's report with Carolyn was trying to make clear is that we need some national leadership on this. And what would that look like? So Jonathan, I'm going to come to you in terms of as a planner, but I also, as I say, I know you're in Toronto, but I also know you were in Victoria. You're a plant.
Yeah. They've dropped me back into the big city. I'm Jonathan Tinney. I'm a principal with a consulting and planning and architecture firm called SVN, just down the street from you. But most of my career was spent in British Columbia in consulting roles, doing a lot of work on the design and implementation of new communities. I worked on the university community at SFU, which was quite groundbreaking at the time in terms of its approach to sort of integration of natural assets into the infrastructure plan there, although we didn't call it that at the time. And then I spent some time on the other side of the fence as the chief planner in Victoria. So I actually see some former colleagues on the call here, which is great to see. So what was your question, Mary?
Just to talk to us about what SVN's perspective is. You know, you can talk about whatever you like, Jonathan, but I think you're in professional practice.
Yes.
You're dealing with clients all the time.
Yeah, and I think, you know,
let's talk about the challenge of getting them to do the right thing. Just saying.
Well, we're very fortunate at SVN. We have some great clients who actually push us from time to time. And I think, you know, in certain types of projects, thinking like this is relatively easy. I think, you know, Kim sort of touched on it really well. And in that, you know, when we're looking at new communities, when we're looking at new developments, we're starting to come to a place where we're thinking about how we replace gray things with green things. And it's relatively easy to figure out where the cost benefits are of that when you're building something new, because you can actually see, you know, by restoring a stream bed or by sort of maintaining a level of permeability within the community, you don't have to build certain things. And so it's a very easy exercise to on the ledger to be able to say, well, we didn't have to build that pipe, we didn't have to build this, and be able to see where those clear sort of benefits are. The add-on to that is the sort of the intangible benefits, right? In a new community, we have to build not just infrastructure, but we also have to build parks. We have to build places for people, and so there's a real amazing, overlap between the preservation of and enhancement of natural assets and these creations of these sort of really lovely people spaces. So the idea of taking a creek bed, enhancing it, so that not only does it do the kind of work you need for a stormwater management, but also does the kind of work that you need for providing nature to people in new development, providing sense of place, all of those other kinds of things. It's a really, really powerful, opportunity. The challenge I think that we're in, and it's one that I think that Roy and his group are really looking at, is how do we do this in existing developments, in infill. You talked, Mary, about the boundaries, where we stop at a municipal boundary, and sort of how do we think about the value and putting a price tag on some of these assets and what they're worth in a way that allows us to make decisions between, Victoria and Saanich, or, Toronto and Vaughan, as things move across, and how do we come to an alignment on what those assets are worth and how much we should be investing in them when the political realities in those two locations might be different. And that's really, I think that's sort of the next step, and one certainly that a lot of people on this call are really thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just taking deep intake of breath. Let's have everybody on the screen. Thanks, Wendy. I'd like to have everybody on, and everybody open your mics. So that we don't have to say you're muted. Just everybody, including you, so open your mics. And let's just have a collective chat. Do not spotlight me anymore, Wendy. Let's have everybody on. Yeah, thank you. So we can all just have a chat about this. Couple of things on this. I love this. Some of the phrasing, other than crap development, which I'm in love with, but replacing gray with green. This idea that what our friends at ICLEI always talk about, which is no more single solving, always multi-solving, which is what Jonathan just got to. That and again, back to my experience in the Gulf Coast, we had to really push that you could invest in resilience and invest in livability. And I remember in New York after Hurricane Sandy, some of those initiatives, that was written right into the RFP. That if you don't just create a park anymore, or you don't just build a bridge, you've got to have these kinds of things. I think that the dilemma we've got is the money is still so siloed, right? I'm appreciative that there are people from Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada, HICC, on the call today. Thank you for outing yourself and putting yourself into the chat. But they are navigating big honking dollars with provinces and now directly with municipalities, and they just want to get stuff, and they got political masters that want to get stuff built. And I'm interested, what do you think the levers are that we've got across the country that would insist that we never are satisfied with a single investment alone that only has one benefit ever again? What are the levers? Thoughts?
Well, it is that I've done triple bottom line assessment for land sales, for development applications. So using those tools, also using full cost accounting, full life cycle analysis. That's really part, and involving, when we talk about natural assets, we also need to include physical assets. And if you would completely change the game if you did full cost accounting and full life cycle analysis, because the natural assets would finally be valued, because they save hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in development when they're included.
How do we, when you're doing those triple bottom analyses, which have existed for a while, you said that, and I appreciate that too, because I'm been around as well. I know these things have been around for a while, but when you create that argumentation, who, in your experience, Kim, and I'm interested in others, which order of government is the most responsive to it? In other words, who says, yep, I get it, that's important. And the other thing, the other little larger challenge I always feel we struggle with is that the impacts of these investments are longer than a typical political term. And so how do we take a tool, say this shows that in 17 years or in whatever it is, this is what it will cost you if you don't do it? How do we get ourselves to an ethos that will do the right thing over the long term? Kim, in your experience, when you have these fabulous studies, who's
Yep.
paying attention?
It said the developers who are doing, as Jonathan said, the right thing, first off, but it said the conventional development process incentivizes sprawl and single family dwellings, particularly flat fees, DCCs, development cost charges, fees, and that sort of thing. So being able to change the system that says, actually, what is the outcome we want instead of what's coming in the front door? And I said what we did with the triple bottom line assessment for all development applications, we said it does 4 things that developers ask for, at least 3, might remember 3. I said level playing field. Everyone gets assessed by this. Yeah. Number 2, you told us, you gave us your goalposts. You put in what you wanted up front. So before we even buy a piece of land, we know what you want. Number 3, you prioritize what you need. So if there's a particular area or particular aspect of things, if you want green infrastructure, then you value it. And fourthly, the outcome, the valuation, actually incentivizes, like fast tracks the application, and you don't need to do policies and all the other stuff, the fluff that takes forever. Those applications get next in line service because they score so high. You take it to your board or your council, and they go, "Wow, it scored 88% on your triple bottom line checklist. I'm approving it." It scored 21%. What's wrong? No. We want some changes. And so I think that's the biggest piece for doing the triple bottom line pieces and the development. Yeah.
Kim, you did that in Nanaimo? Where did you do that?
I did it in Port Coquitlam. And we have a sustainable site design checklist in regional district of Nanaimo now.
And the populations of Port Coquitlam and in the region, just tell me how big people-wise.
Port Coquitlam is probably getting close to about 100,000. That's a guess. Someone might correct me. And then the regional district of Nanaimo is about 167,000.
Yeah, I want people to listen to this because I think that when we look at where innovation is possible, it is often possible in a mid-sized city or region like the ones that Kim has just described, which really is a challenge to all of you living in mid-sized cities to get moving and get these pilots going. And then those of us who are in the larger cities, we will gradually find our way to do it too. But I really appreciate the tolerance for risk and for innovation is often, there's often more nimbleness in those mid-sized environments. So Kim, thank you for suggesting that. And then the idea though, is that you're also able to, I was going to say tame, which isn't fair, but you're able to rally your partners in the development industry because of the reasons you just identified. They go to the front of the line. They know everybody's playing by the same rules. There's a level playing field. They have some certainty and they get bonused by actually doing it. So it's a really interesting way to do it. Anybody have thoughts about this, about how you actually, go ahead, Kim. Go ahead.
Just one other really good example. We did in the city of Port Coquitlam the first green roof regulation in Canada. So we beat the city of Toronto, love Toronto, University of Toronto. But it said we were able to do that through landscape standards, natural assets. You validate natural assets. And ironically, the first application we got would have been the second largest green roof in North America, Cisco Foods. And because though we worked with SFU, Simon Fraser University, with their green roof, we had 6 meter beat standards. And if you do a landscape standard, you can do a variance, a development variance permit. So we didn't get this massive, 12-acre roof. We got a green roof over the admin building, but they met or beat the 6 standards for which we established with SFU. So we got the jobs, we got the green site, we got, the property tax and, those and all of those aspects. So that's an great example. Hope that helps.
Yeah, Mary, I love what
Jonathan. Yeah.
I love what Kim's saying here. In a lot of our conversations, my conversations with our municipal clients, we talk a lot about make what you want easy. We spent a lot of time as planners. If we want something better, we'll create another set of guidelines, or we'll add an extra step into the process. We need to start to reset our thinking in terms of the municipalities to think about how we actually smooth the pathway for the things that we want. I think I would even go one step further. Certainly within my experience, you need to make those things easy. In some municipalities, you need to work really hard to stop making it hard. I won't say which municipality, but we've had projects where we've tried to incorporate into new communities, a structured wetland, beyond just the standard bathtub stormwater management pond, but the idea of a structured wetland to manage stormwater management, provided all of the technical data that said that this would handle the stormwater in the same way that a normal system would. Staff said, that's great. We love that you're doing that, but can you also put in an overflow pipe in the event that it fails? And so now we've doubled the cost of infrastructure in order to try to do the right thing. And I think that happens more often. What Kim's talking about is amazing. I would say in my experience, that's, it's a preciously small number. I think there's a lot of places, a lot of municipalities that are looking at this they're not thinking about it at all. And then there's others that are actually actively making it hard. And I would put the onus back on the development community as well. They need to, they need to be thinking hard about actually doing the right thing as opposed to just trying to do the quick and easy thing. And so, there is that partnership.
The dilemma is that the development community is not a monolithic thing. It's highly, highly regional and highly influenced by particular market conditions and all that kind of stuff. A number of things that you folks have raised, and the chat, as usual, is blowing up. Thank you, chat. One of the questions is about regional governance. How do we actually get this kind of holistic thinking? I'm wondering, Patience, have you got thought? I know that you've been, true to your name, you've been patiently pursuing this, but are there models of small g governance? Do you know what I mean? Because people are saying on the chat, look, we've eliminated regional government. We're now, there's 9 of us fighting with each other. Thoughts on that? About, have you been able to see how to move that collaborative kind of instinct together?
You asked about levers of government, or levers that you can use against government, and Indigenous land and Indigenous folk are one of those levers. But here's your challenge. First of all, if you do not approach Indigenous communities with respect, if you come to the Indigenous community and say, we have a solution and we want you to join us, hopefully most of those Indigenous communities are going to show you the hand, and maybe and should show you the hand. The reality is if you want the Indigenous community to help you actually leverage this, then you need to come in at the beginning, before you've made your plans, before you've laid it all out, before you've decided what the perfect solution is. Sit down with them, be prepared. It's going to take time to build relationships. Once you have built that relationship with respect, now you have a partner who is actually going to bring you to the table, and you now have leverage. And so the reality is that's the future. We have ways of knowledge that are so ingrained in us, and yes, many, I mean, it is what it is, but the reality is bringing Indigenous communities into the picture in a meaningful way. That's the part that just frustrates the heck out of us. Is this idea that, we've got a token Indigenous person, or we've gone and we sent a letter to the chief and council, they never responded, so we're just going to carry on. That kind of stuff, it just infuriates people. And then they, show you the hand, and to use Kim's directness, maybe one finger of the hand might be part of that. But the reality is that Indigenous people are just frustrated in many cases, in many communities. Now, every community is different as well. So if you find something with one community and then you expect that you're going to run that playbook again a second time, again, you're going to see the hand. Every community is different. We have different values and different priorities. And so that's the other piece of all of this. So are we a lever? Absolutely. And in fact, we're getting pretty insistent about being part of this conversation, and we have a right to be. And the next step now is sometimes that's going to slow down the process. But as Kim said, if you incentivize, where is the Indigenous community in this application, then, and that gets moved up to the front of the line.
If you jump in.
So anyway.
Can I just back up a sec, Mary, on a point that was raised a couple of minutes ago, if you don't mind? We talked a bit about pilots and innovations and things of that sort. And sure, that all of that is important, but everybody on this call lives in a community which, as a starting point, this week, this month, could begin a process of saying, what natural assets do I even have in my jurisdiction? What condition are they in? What risks do they face? What services do they provide? And so that process is generally speaking called inventorying, and there's even a national standard for that process. And it's pretty hard to go wrong with that as a starting point and that as an evidence base. And so I would say, are there barriers? Yes, of course there's barriers. Do we need to overcome them? Absolutely. Some of that is a long-term play, but let's not wait and do nothing until we can do everything. There's practical things that every local government in this country can do now. And really, what's the good argument for not understanding what natural assets you rely on?
Roy, is there a tool or is there a natural assets mapping tool that you've developed or someone else has developed, or are we calling on one to be developed? Maybe somebody will put one in the chat. But if we had do we have the instrumentation to do this?
Well, it's all done. Well, no, sorry, I shouldn't say that. For the inventory process, there is I think a fairly well-defined process. There's a national standard now from the CSA group, W218, which anybody can use. Now, to Patience's point, does this fully interweave First Nations knowledge, worldviews, perspectives? I would argue in most cases, no. That is, and I want to be very humble and understated when I talk about the work that we're doing with First Nations, because we're really at the very beginning. But we are starting to work with a small number of First Nations to see how we can kind of interweave basically traditional ecological knowledge and Western science. And it won't be successful because I say it's successful. It'll be successful if First Nations think it's successful. So that is a part of this journey. But you know, yes, there are tools. There's even a national standard, and it's a really good starting point. Will it solve all of your problems of, you know, the fact that our societies are organized differently from nature? No, it's not going to do that for you. But it is a great starting point. And, you know, if you're not doing this stuff and you don't have a good idea of the assets that you provide, back to kind of Kim's bluntness, I mean, the chances are you're probably, in a lot of development cases, bringing in the bulldozers, scraping away every green object off the face of the earth, and then saying, okay, folks, well, what services should we build back when some of the things that you've just scraped off the face of the earth were probably providing the stormwater management, flood risk reduction services that you are now paying to build back via an engineered asset.
Right. Staff are putting a bunch of links, and I appreciate Roy's challenge that each of us could leave today and just do a little homework and try to determine, well, what are we sitting on? What are we facing? I'm interested about, Jonathan, have you got a comment about how to introduce this instrumentation into the bidding process, into actually doing work? What are your colleagues in the planning profession doing?
And I think that's the primary challenge to next. I think Roy's absolutely right. There are frameworks by which you can inventory what you have. I think it's really about now, you know, we talked about how these assets get piecemealed across municipal boundaries. Let's talk next about how they get piecemealed from development site to development site. Sure. And so I think the next step is to figure out some of those mechanisms, the same way we have now for hard infrastructure. You know, we have development charges, we have things that allow for the fair spreading of costs across different sites, cost sharing mechanisms and structures of that sort. We need to think about the next phase of those where we're actually weaving the conception around natural assets and the work that they do goes into those structures. So again, we're treating these things as if they were infrastructure. And as soon as we do that, as soon as we provide dollars and cents to them, they all of a sudden become part of the development pro forma. They become part of the process, and we can continue to move that forward. Because I don't think any municipality is going to be able to take care of and grow and rehabilitate the entirety of their sort of natural asset framework throughout the community. They're
Right.
while at the same time as they develop. And I think this is, it's a really key point here is, the binary thinking we had in the 1950s where you have development and you have nature, and one comes at the cost of the other. That is what we really need to push through, because I agree with Roy. We need housing, but we also need to maintain the natural environment. So it's absolutely imperative that we figure out how to walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah.
There you go. On that happy note, I guess one of the questions I have too, back to what Patience was mentioning around respect with Indigenous communities, the land back movement may in fact mean that Indigenous communities are the proponents. So, and one of the examples, Roy, in your report is the Jericho Lands, which is being, the whole initiative is being led by Indigenous communities. And it's all, so I am interested about how we maybe need to amplify more of that so that you don't actually go to them with a project, you actually make the land available, and then they'll develop their own project, right? So that, and do we need to be doing that on a more ambitious scale that if you look at the federal program, Public Lands for Housing, that's in essence what they're trying to get at is, could they release public land for housing, excuse me, could they release lands to various proponents to develop these projects, and rather than having it so tightly controlled?
Yeah, and it's not either or.
It's not either or, right?
And that's what I said about sustainability. It's not or, not a bunch of seals. We're slightly more intelligent, hopefully to be able to do this work. And First Nations have that ethos already. We have to learn it back. And so, but it said understanding, if you integrate those pieces, it's really going to value those natural assets and the other pieces within it. And you end up with a better development. In Dockside Green, it was designed 80% less water demand than conventional crap. And then we reused 80% of the water on site. So there was an on-site private utility that managed the wastewater, brought it almost up to Canadian drinking water standards. The developers were quaffing it at the opening, just exceeded it for salinity. That was reused to create a green waterway, which increased the value of the property that was right on the front of that waterway. And reused the green roofs for the purple pipe infrastructure and gray water toilets. We didn't get permission from health to use them in washing machines. But so there's a site. It's also designed for a 100-year storm that it will take it from the top and take it through all those levels and then out the other side. So that design achieved that, and it was the only place in Victoria for a decade and a half that treated its sewage, period. And then we reused it, so it's being able to do that, and its own district heat and hot water system, which having lived there for 9 years, I paid $20 a month for heat and hot water.
Wow.
For a 2-bedroom plus den condo, so comparison would at least be 120 on convention.
Again, I always feel at CUI with CityTalk, we're all in essence having the same conversation every week, like it's a different domain. We might be talking about it here and now. We're always talking about this dilemma, the Hazel McCallion dilemma, which is that in Canada, here's how it works. The federal government has all the money. The provinces have all the power. And the municipal governments have all the problems. And I'm adding a fourth, but local communities have all the solutions. And so we're left with, if you had to pick, where's the most effective intervention point for us to have a much higher adoption of natural assets and management and using them in the catalytic way that we can? Where would you start? A lot of you were talking about on the ground. Here are examples of things that are working here. And I think it's important. These are proof points. Does anybody have the appetite to talk at all about what a province or the federal government should be doing to incentivize this?
Your
Yeah.
infrastructure funding has to value green infrastructure or you don't get it.
Make it conditional. Tick. Okay, so you go to the front of the line in municipal approvals, but you also go to the front of the line for any federal assistance of, okay. Any other suggestions? Yes, Roy.
I think the conditionalities are primordial, and I don't think it's just do-gooding. It's about fiscal responsibility so that you are backing natural assets which are going to provide you cost-effective, reliable services in a changing climate, as opposed to only thinking narrowly about rigid engineered assets. Finally, you need them both, but you have to actually bring it into the funding context. I think you have to look at the federal lands that will be dispersed under their housing policy. I also think that the feds and the province together finally need to exhibit far greater leadership on this issue of watershed fragmentation. It is true in every watershed in this country that you'll have one aquifer, let's say, but you'll have 10 different local governments all drawing from it, each with different timeframes, horizons, data sets. We have to get over that, or finally, we'll make good progress and this work will stall out. I think a really important thing that the provinces can do, every local government act in this country, or its equivalent, is basically silent on the idea of whether local governments, when they manage assets, are also managing natural assets, and when they deliver services, whether they're delivering services from nature. And that has to be clarified, or people just tend to sit on their hands. We did quite an extensive barriers report, which I can stick into the chat. And, finally, it came down to a couple of things that are going to stall out this work. One is the watershed fragmentation, with everyone pulling in a different direction. And two, it's the silence of provincial legislation governing local governments, because we have a dominant worldview that says nature is property, and if you combine that with an act that is silent, people are going to tend towards inertia. Those are big barriers the feds, the provinces could do something about. None of that stops anyone on this call today from working with their local government to get some of the basics. We have to come at it from several layers.
I think this might be the first CityTalk where someone has said primordial, just saying. I appreciate the bigness of this and the sense of imperative that people are feeling, but I'm continuing to sort of see if we can zero in on what would the priority be. Patience, do you have a thought on that? I mean, what would you be telling people to go after? What is the most important achievement how could we move this forward? Do you?
I think from again, it's back to getting everybody at the table at the very beginning.
Yeah, at the local level?
At all the levels. Remember that the local chief and council for the Indigenous community has to know all the federal laws, all the provincial laws, all the municipal laws, and they have their own community to run. And so those kinds of things, you need to get people to the table at the very beginning, then you can leverage. Because when you have those base support and the people talking to begin with, and being respectful to begin with, and at the regional level, at the bigger level, because again, if you start into these silos, yes, they have value, but the reality is I think what Roy said is really important. And that's part of the work we've been doing with again, the Indigenous communities themselves, is that they want their maps to show a watershed. They're not interested in this little reserve piece. They want to know what the bigger piece is. And that's the biggest challenge, is actually getting access to that information. And so part of the mapping is actually just getting the public information, and then we go and ground truth it, because actually that public information isn't actually accurate.
inaccurate.
And
You know,
so you've
I was
got to start with the information. It's start with the data. You've
Yeah,
got to
I've-
have that first.
that is coming out in the chat as well. People are saying, do we have the granular data? So I think that might be another intervention. Do we need to be advocating for disaggregating and getting reliable data? Jonathan, do you have a particular thought on this? Yeah, go ahead.
I do. I'm a big fan of trying to align new thinking within existing processes. I find if you're working with bureaucrats, they tend to respond well if you're telling them that this feels a lot like a process they already understand. And when I think about the different jurisdictions across the country, I think about where are we thinking about primarily, largely this is dealing at the land use level. Where are we thinking about land use in a sort of watershed scale? In Ontario, we're talking about the conservation authorities. In BC, to a greater or lesser extent, we're talking about regional districts. And so, are there changes that can be done at those scales? That allow for the sort of investment in thinking and guidance that specifically sort of runs this. I think overlaying the First Nations conversation on that and territorial lands, especially in non-treaty locations, is really important as well. Maybe a bit more complicated, but doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. And then I think at the municipal level, it's about aligning these existing. We already have existing processes for funding and approving infrastructure. If we think of this as infrastructure, then it's not that huge a leap to jump and think about incorporating these assets into those structures in a way that allows for cost sharing across. The federal and the provincial levels, you're absolutely right. They have the money. Typically, for infrastructure, they're providing that money through major projects, which are approved through an EA or other type of business case. And so clear rules within those business case development and those environmental assessments that specifically take into account some of these structures. All of a sudden, then the money starts to flow to the right projects.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the practicality of what you're suggesting as somebody working in the field. What I'm hearing from you guys again and again is this has to operate at all scales. So you need that kind of common table, whether you're working in a hyper-local community or you're working in a region or you're working in the province or, God forbid, you're working federally. We've got to have all these diverse voices and so it's all scales. It's a good fractal experience. The other thing is this notion of alignment. What you just got at, Jonathan. Sometimes we make it too difficult. Sometimes we can align because we have some kind of related challenge and we can make you can see that in Alberta. I'm looking for the Alberta folks who are listening to just chime in and say they are working in a province where alignment sometimes is more difficult between the federal, provincial, and local governments, but we can find it. And then this broader definition of infrastructure, we know that governments around the world are investing in infrastructure. It's a battle for us to win, to convince people that infrastructure is more than just cement. So how do we actually have that conversation and try to embrace that? Last thing, I'm noticing Councillor Story is asking for examples, please, for rural communities, smaller communities. Nice to see you, Councillor. We're glad you're on. Please consult the chat, gang, if you have particular solutions. We got asked this about rural too. So I think we need very specific strategies depending on the jurisdiction that you're working in and the particular challenges, if it's an agricultural community or anything. 30 seconds to everybody, not even 10 seconds to everybody. Last comment as we go forward. 10 seconds to you, Kim.
Mandate asset management plans that include in whether it's hard or soft for funding. We're hundreds of billions of dollars behind in replacing infrastructure. We can't afford to do the current way we're doing it. And it'll stop wagging budgets, wild ass guessing. If you don't have an asset management plan, you're just wagging. And we have 8 cents. We only get 8 cents on the tax dollar, and we own 60% of the infrastructure. Natural assets will save us hundreds of millions of dollars, and First Nations will show us how.
I love it. Now we got wild ass in the vocabulary. 10 seconds to you, Jonathan, then Patience, and then Roy. 10 seconds, Jonathan.
Yeah, I think I added it all, Mary. I think it's good.
You can't top wild ass, I bet. Patience.
No, I can't.
It's about data, getting the data into the hands of the local communities and the local organizations. They need those maps. They need those data. They can't make decisions without it. And getting that data into one place is hugely problematic.
Yep, got it. Roy, last word to you.
I'm trying to work in the word primordial again, but I can't figure out how. So like just riffing on Patience's point, I would say about data, if you If you're at a local government level or community, get started on the inventories. It's not rocket science. It gives you a decent starting place. It speaks to Patience's point about data. It can be done at different scales. If you're with the feds, for God's sake, read the report, please, and see
Everybody read the report, not just the feds.
and just see what can be done with regard to the funding programs and with respect to federal land disbursements and indeed on your own federal land.
Do what we all can do to value our natural assets. Kim, Roy, Patience, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us at City Talk. We'll see you next week or 2 weeks from now on the next topic. And remember, we save the chat and we save the discussion. Thanks very much, gang, for being part of City Talk and raising and elevating these issues. I hope everybody goes and reads the reports and all of the links in the chat. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.